Hello, friends, and welcome to the April 20th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about policy issues here in our great state and have a conversation about how you can engage in that process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and we have an exciting Earth Week episode for you today as we welcome Luke Metzger to the program. Luke is the Director of Environment Texas, an office mate and longtime friend of the program, and will talk with us about current climate efforts. And we'll play a clip from an event Bee participated in recently featuring renowned climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe. On this week's watch list, Josh talks to us about what he's reading in preparation for the upcoming Texas legislature. But before we get to the program, I want to share a couple of quick thoughts at the top. First, thanks as always to all who've reached out with comments, questions, and suggestions for the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. I'll be looking for your emails at scott@texasimpact.org. And help us out by subscribing, sharing, and inviting a friend to listen. It is Earth Week, and so my son came home from elementary school this week talking about all of the things we can do in the house to help with the ecosystem. He probably used the word ecosystem a dozen times, so apparently that concept got through to him. And they were great. Taking shorter showers, using less AC, recycling, and 100%. We should be doing all of those things, and I hope he'll keep us more accountable at our house. It might give me some extra leverage when we inevitably debate the appropriate temperature for the house this summer. And now we'll see if Shannon listens to the program. That said, this Earth Week, we're once again reminded that changing one light bulb, while important, is not enough to save the planet. We need systematic changes that can only come through public policy change if we really want to address the climate crisis. So we'll talk about some of that today, and we'll continue the conversation throughout the year. But we hope to give you some concrete steps you can take to make sure the ecosystem is protected for all of our kids and grandkids and their kids and grandkids. So with that, here we go. Joining us for today's conversation is friend of the program and office mate, Luke Metzger, Executive Director of Environment Texas and a state park junkie. Luke, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Scott. Good to be back on.
So before we get into the program, I know that you and your family have set a goal of visiting every state park in Texas, and I think listeners just really want to know, where are you in that goal so far?
I'm almost halfway. Texas has about 85 state parks and natural areas. And we just hit our 39th recently, Lake Whitney State Park, which is just kind of west of Hillsboro. And it was one of our new favorites. Really wonderful park there.
I don't want to make any of the other parks jealous, but do you have a favorite?
I love the Davis Mountains, out near Big Bend and Marfa area. That's gorgeous. And then Colorado Bend, Pedernales Falls. There's so many great parks. It's hard to choose, but those would definitely be up there. And then Big Bend, of course, itself. The Big Bend Ranch State Park.
I've never been there, so I guess I need to make that my own personal homework for this next year.
Mm-hmm. I encourage it.
All right. So state parks aside, I know you're a great Twitter follow, and for those interested in environmental issues, I recommend you follow Luke at Luke Metzger. But I saw in your Twitter feed just this last week some good news that we'll start with today. You tweeted a graphic from Environment America showing that Texas dominates other states in terms of producing renewable energy. And that might seem counter to many of us, that, we don't seem like we're a renewable hero state. So it runs counter to the public narrative. But talk to us some about Texas as a key producer of renewables. Why is that so?
Yeah, it's because of smart policies, but from the state and federal level, as well as just the incredible wind and solar resource that we have here in the state. We have better renewable energy potential than any other state in the country, and we've really worked to tap into that. Texas in 1999 passed a law requiring electric companies to get some of their electricity from wind and solar farms. That law was so successful that in 2005, Governor Governor Perry then pushed to double the mandate, and at the same time make some investments in transmission lines to connect some of the windiest and sunniest parts of the state to our cities, so we could bring that wind and solar to our homes and businesses. And that combined with federal incentives, tax breaks, and incentives really helped spur a boom in renewable energy. And so Texas surpassed California as the number one in total renewable energy production back in, I think, about 2006, 2007. And, we've just been, leading the country ever since. So we've been the longtime leader in wind power. But for a long time, we were not doing as much on the solar side. We weren't even top 10 for solar about a decade ago. But we've been a bit of a late bloomer on solar, but we're making up for lost time. And so as of this last year, we're second in the country for solar, and really gaining on California, which continues to be the leader on solar.
All right, so catch California. Let's do it. A lot of times on this podcast, we ask people to have hard conversations with their legislators. Is this an area where we can have productive, fruitful conversations with both candidates and current state elected officials? And is there anything we should be talking to them about right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we know that renewable energy is widely popular, across the political spectrum. Democrats, independents, Republicans all love, particularly solar. It also wind. They're excited about batteries. There was a poll taken after Winter Storm Uri, and 56% of Texans said that the number one goal for Texas energy policy should be achieving 100% clean energy. So it's widely popular. After the blackouts, though, we did see some politicians blaming falsely wind power, for the blackouts, when federal regulators have found that it was failures in the natural gas supply that were the primary contributors to the blackouts. But more recently, we just saw a couple weeks ago, Governor Abbott actually did a press conference out in Midland and touted Texas's leadership on renewable energy.
I saw that.
Yeah, so that was good news. I think the more that people are talking about the success of clean energy, the better. There remain attacks, though, on renewable energy. At the Public Utility Commission, there are proposals to raise fees on wind and solar. And that could really jeopardize our leadership and jeopardize the transition to, away from fossil fuels and towards, a healthy climate. And so definitely your listeners, I think if they can talk to elected officials about the importance of supporting renewable energy and not discriminating against it in state policy.
That is certainly something to talk with our representatives about, especially this Earth Week, friends. I know one of the other things that you all are working on currently is to encourage electric school buses. Why don't you tell us some about that campaign and what we should know? Yeah,
well, school buses are actually the biggest form of public transportation in America, which is interesting. And that we have every day millions of kids here in Texas and around the country ride a bus to school. And unfortunately, though, about 95% of the buses on the road are fueled by diesel. And we know that diesel exhaust can be dangerous to children's health. Not just when they're waiting outside the bus to get on, but some of that exhaust can enter the cabin, and so we think that kids shouldn't be exposed to toxic pollution every day that they're going to school. And fortunately, we know that electric school buses have zero pollution and are much healthier way for children to travel, and now are available and ready to meet the transportation needs of school districts.
So where's the push here? Are you looking at local level? Is it state effort? What's the goal?
Yeah, all across the board. So fortunately, the Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law back last fall, and President Biden signed it, and it included historic funding for electric school buses, $2.5 billion just for electric school buses, and then another $2.5 billion available for alternative fueled buses, including electric school buses. buses. So now, school districts have a great opportunity to apply for these funds, purchase some electric buses. And, we know here in Texas, only one school district, Everman ISD, which is near Fort Worth, has previously purchased electric buses, but we know many other school districts are interested, and with this funding really could take advantage of this technology. And, in addition to just the health benefits for children, you get the climate benefits, not having carbon pollution going into our atmosphere. And there's also economic benefits. We just released a report a few weeks ago that found that one, electric buses, because electricity is much cheaper than diesel fuel, especially these days, that over the lifetime of the bus, that it more than pays for itself, the electric bus. The electric buses also require far less maintenance, so there's less operations and upkeep required of school district. So that's one way that it can pay for it. But electric buses can also provide grid resilience, and they're basically big batteries on wheels, right? That we can just drive them to where we need them, plug them into the grid. Our study found that one Type D electric bus could provide enough energy during a natural disaster to power 5 operating rooms in a hospital. So that's pretty exciting that they could provide these emergency services, but also just regular services during the year. So, for example, in the summertime, we don't use the buses very often, right? Mostly they're sitting idle, but that's exactly the time when we need electricity the most, right? Because with everyone air conditioners running full steam in the summertime, the electricity demand peaks then. And so if we plug those unused electric buses in the grid, we can provide this extra power, and then you get the electric companies to pay the school districts for that electricity. So it's a real win-win scenario that we're excited about.
So short-term ask is to talk to school board members, and if yes, do you have some resources that they can help guide those conversations?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, talk to school board members, let them know about this tremendous opportunity, to encourage them to apply for the federal funding. But also, I think a lot of school districts routinely do bond elections. Like, for example, here in Austin, the Austin ISD is having a bond election this fall, and we're encouraging them to set aside some of the funds that they would otherwise use for diesel buses for electric buses. So yeah, talking to them and just letting them know that this technology it's here, it's clean, it's affordable, and this funding is available, that we should make sure we get as much of that federal money in Texas as we can.
There might be some people who need a little extra information besides just this podcast. Is there somewhere online they can go for more information?
Yeah. So if you go to environmenttexas.org, we have that report that I mentioned on our website. Folks can also email me, Luke at environmenttexas.org. Happy to send them the link if they don't find it immediately.
And last but not least, Luke, I know some people don't like my use of the term homework, but I know our listeners like homework. So anything that you can think of that they should be talking to their elected representatives about over the course of the next few weeks and months? We've been encouraging people to meet with their state elected officials and candidates for office. Anything you'd like them to plug?
Yeah, well, if we could go back to state parks,
yes.
That's not only just a personal love, it's also a professional pursuit. And I mentioned, there are, 85 state parks, which sounds like a lot, but it turns out that in terms of the acreage that we have here for Texas, we rank pretty poorly compared to the other states. And given how rapidly the state is growing, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department estimates we need to add about 1 million acres more of state parks in order to keep up with public demand. And already we're starting to see the park system straining under the significant demand, especially during the pandemic. So many people, flocked to our parks, as a place they could get some fresh air and be outside. And some spiritual nourishment. And unfortunately, too often the parks, hit capacity and they say, sorry, all the day use passes are gone. You can't come in. Or if you want to go camping, sometimes it takes months of planning. You have to book ahead of time to want to go camping. And so, and right now, a lot of our state parks and most of the acreage is out in West Texas. It's, the gigantic parks in Big Bend, and those are amazing places, but we need more parks near our cities where it's easy for, a family to, load up the minivan on a moment's notice and just drive out to the park and go camping and see the stars and show their children wildlife. And so the good news is that next year is the 100th anniversary of the state park system. And so given how popular state parks are, and given that the state of Texas is expected to have a $25 billion surplus, we think now is a perfect time to ask the legislature to put aside some of that money and invest in the next 100 years of our state parks. And so we're asking legislators to set aside $1 billion to create a trust fund that can be used to buy new state park land, to provide more grants to cities to expand city parks, as well as to help other efforts to conserve land. We think that with an election this year, coming up, now is a great time to be talking about these issues. Elected officials are especially sensitive to what people care about. And we think this could be a winner, across the board, across the political spectrum.
Luke, any other shameless plugs to leave us with today?
Oh man, where do I start?
I gave you a free one.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, another campaign that we're working on, and I should say, I'm fortunate to have staff both here in our Texas office, and we're part of a national network, so we're able to benefit from lots of different people working on these issues. I just get to share their good work. But one of the efforts we're working on is around lead in drinking water. We know folks probably remember the Flint, Michigan crisis, and how an entire community, predominantly African American community, was basically poisoned with this lead, which is such a harmful neurotoxin. And it turns out that we've got lead in drinking water here in Texas, even in our schools. We did an analysis that found about 71% of schools in Texas that have done testing have found lead in their drinking water. And so we've been urging school districts, particularly Houston Independent School District, which is one of the worst in the state for lead contamination, to install filters to make sure that kids aren't drinking, lead when they go to a water fountain. So that's another one. If you're talking to school board members, we'd encourage talking about electric school buses and lead in drinking water as two critical children's health initiatives.
Luke, thank you so much for the time today. Happy Earth Week to you, and we'll look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Scott. Happy Earth Week. Thanks, everybody.
This week's episode was brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, and the COVID Collaborative.
Joining us once again for this week's Weekly Watchlist is Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston. Josh, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Good to be back.
I saw online that for the first time in a really long time, virtually every major religion in the world is celebrating some sort of high holy days during the month of April. So that's kind of cool. But also means that this past weekend was Easter for those of us in the Christian tradition. So did you enjoy your Easter weekend?
Yeah, it was a very nice weekend with a lot of egg hunts and a lot of good weather.
Did you find any eggs?
Oh, yes. My daughter does this thing where after the egg hunt, she then wants to hide the eggs and have us look for it. And that game goes on and on and on many times over. So we hunted a lot of eggs.
Who's better at hiding the eggs, you or the kid?
It's pretty 50-50. She's pretty good.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We also had a chance to get down to my parents for the weekend and have all kinds of fun. The weather was perfect in that part of Texas. We actually had a chance to go swimming, so that was nice. My friends in the north, sorry about that. We also talked at our staff meeting this last week about what staff members were reading. And I know this is a good time of year to catch up on reading for those in the lobby, for those who are advocates. And you have a lot that you're reading right now, and I know that's something we'll talk about today. So start us off. What are you reading right now?
Yeah, that's right, Scott. I spend a good bit of my day reading. it seems like often that my job is to be a professional reader, and not just the news. I mean, reading all sorts of things for this job. But I probably spend around 3 hours of my day just reading the news. Policy happens due to information, and a lot of folks think that lobbying is going to dinners and being connected enough to be told the deep, dark secrets. And yeah, sure, there's a bit of that, but it's not as much as you'd think. A lot of it is just being able to read the news and to know how to filter it, especially since there's so much of it is social media and kind of pseudo news. And what passes for news these days requires a good bit of filtration. So it's old news that local newspapers have shrunk. And with them, so has the Capitol Press Corps, right? So I was really floored the other day when I was doing some legal research in the Legislative Reference Library. The quality and depth of state-level reporting has really changed, has in 50 years especially, but even in the last couple decades. When you were going through old articles, and informed citizenry and history is really lost out because nowadays it's Twitter. Not Capitol Press Corps and in-depth reports. And it's mostly not changed in a good way, but professionally, I have to be on it. And every now and then there are some needles in the haystack on Twitter. And if you're going to venture into the dark world that is Twitter, you want to know, and you want to know what's going on in Texas government, then Scott Braddock, the editor of the Quorum Report, is one that I read. And he's been following...
previous Weekly Witness guest, and we might have him again on soon.
Yes, good friend of the show.
Definitely a good follow.
Yeah, he's been following the fallout from the governor's roadblocks on the border, which has cost the business community more than $400 million a day. And that's
a day?
A day.
$400. Wow, that's
$400 million a day. Yeah, that was a report done by an economist named Ray Perryman that I saw. An astute observer. Scott is, as those of us in the lobby also are. He wonders out loud on Twitter why the business community has complete fealty to a political party that is now adverse to their interest and costing them money. In politics, there's what's known as the friendly incumbent rule, which is you back the incumbent as long as they're friendly to your interests. But many of us wonder, how bad does it have to get before they begin to hedge their bets in a little more nonpartisan way, if you will. And conversely, he wonders out loud why the opposition party has not been able to capitalize on it.
All right. So that is definitely something we should all be watching. Anything else you're reading?
Yeah, there's a second article that I'm reading from the Atlantic magazine. It's in the actual magazine, but of course it's also available online, as all things are. So as a state-level lobbyist, you have to watch national trends, of course, but sometimes you have to go even higher than 30,000 feet to figure out what's going on. So in this month's magazine, the social psychologist at NYU, Jonathan Haidt, I think, Haidt, has a long but important piece on how social media is a threat to our society, to America, and to democracy. It is entitled After Babel. So it has that nice religious connection to the story from the Hebrew Bible you may have recognized. And I once heard a person say, if you can't name a thing, then that thing has power over you. And this is a really important piece for that reason. We all have this sense that social media is adversely affecting our families, our children, our religious communities, and our democracy itself. And so 3 big things he identifies about social media. 1, it empowers the provocateurs while silencing good citizens.
Yes.
2, it gives more power to the political extremes while reducing the power of the moderate majority. And 3, it administers justice with no due process. And of course, in that sentence, justice is in air quotes because there is no justice without good process. So this piece begins to name it so that we might start to figure out how we even get power over it again. That said, it's not going to make you feel good, and he does not anticipate any quick fixes in the next decade. But it is important to begin to understand what's happening.
Yeah, I think that is important. There's a lot of talk about social media these days. So thanks for sharing that piece. We'll try to get that linked so people can go check it out. Anything else you're reading or watching this week?
Yeah, and finally, there's a great piece in Politico, a story in Politico where it's an interview with a professor of history and Italian studies from New York University. Her name is Ruth Ben Gate, Ghiat. She is an expert on authoritarianism, and the piece is entitled, quote, "One Way History Shows Trump's Personality Cult Will End." But the piece is not so much about the former president as it is on authoritarianism generally. And again, it goes to this idea, if you can't name it, it has power over you. And because authoritarianism is not a thing most Americans have had to think about, much less live through, especially since 1991 and, the end of the Cold War, it's an important thing we begin to think about, because it's certainly taking us by surprise and almost in a blitzkrieg-like fashion, and we've got to figure out what it is and what to do about it. So there are at least 4 important takeaways. One, authoritarianism requires enemies, right? And those enemies are both external and internal to the group. So that internal inquisition, if you will, is just as important, because it's how the authoritarian enforces conformity within their group, and that conformity then gets turned and turned on external enemies that exist outside the tribe. 2, she sees authoritarianism and the authoritarian threat most acutely in state governments, state-level governments. And she specifically names Florida and, unfortunately, Texas.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, the states are now. So if you're a lawyer type like I am, an argument for federalism in our federal system is that the states are, quote, laboratories of democracy. And they turn this around and say what's going on now is, rather than being laboratories in democracy, they're laboratories in autocracy, where these autocratic things are being played out at a state level and being experimented with there. Third, she says, watch for victimhood, that authoritarians always have to be the biggest victim. And they use that victimhood to justify things like the big lie and the attempted takeover of local election offices across the country. And then finally, she says that prosecution and conviction are essential, that asserting that the rule of law is supreme is one reason why it's so essential. And then second, because it exposes what the truth actually is.
All right. 3 good things that Josh is reading. Let us know what you're reading. You can email me at scott@texasimpact.org. Josh, anything else you're watching this week?
Oh, no, that's plenty. Sometimes in this job, you have to kind of pause what you're doing and take a big picture look at it and stop and think about things in a different way.
Well, it's definitely some time to think these days. We're going to have a lot coming up in the weeks and months to come. So keep an eye on the space for what we should be watching. Josh, thanks again. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye, Scott.
Joining us for today's conversation is Texas Impact's Executive Director, Bee Moorhead, with a special guest who will be joining us by pre-recorded audio. But for now, Bee, glad you're with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy Earth Week, Scott.
Happy Earth Week. Is that a thing people say to each other? You're the first person to say it this week, but I like it.
I like it too. And you said it to us earlier this week, and I was so taken with it, I decided to copy it and put it in my own vernacular. So thanks for that.
Yeah, my son loves Earth Week, so we'll have to play this for him later.
Absolutely.
Jumping in, you had a chance to visit with Katharine Hayhoe, who is certainly a rock star in the climate and environmental justice world and somebody from here in the great state of Texas. Tell us about that opportunity.
Yeah, so for folks who don't know, Katharine Hayhoe is a professor at Texas Tech University. She's a woman of many, many talents. She's a climate scientist who has her own consulting firm, and she's also a climate expert with the Nature Conservancy. So she's got a really large profile on the national and global climate stages and has gained a lot of renown as someone who is herself a person of faith and is able to bridge conversations about climate to even pretty conservative faith communities and faith traditions. So she's in a unique communication space, and it was just a treat to get to be able to sit on a panel with her and have kind of a small group discussion about the topic of faith and climate. The reason that we were there was in Houston last month was the first convening in a couple of years in person of the Society for Environmental Journalism. It was a big conference. Luke Metzger, who was on the program earlier, also spoke at that conference. And Katharine and I were on a panel that was moderated by Meera Subramanian, who's the co-director of the Religion and Environment Story Project at Boston University. So Meera had asked us to answer just a few questions that had to do with, since the audience was people who are mostly reporters who report on environmental issues, from a faith perspective, what were tips and pet peeves and things that we thought were particularly important for reporters to understand or get right when they're reporting about the engagement of faith communities in climate and environmental issues.
You all had a really great conversation, from my understanding, and I take it now we're going to hear some of those clips. What are we going to be hearing in these next clips?
It was hard to pick what couple of things I thought we should listen to. Everything Katharine said, I thought merited further listening, and we're posting a lot of that content on our YouTube channel, so folks will be able to hear it there and see it there as well. But she talked, one of Katharine's most frequent refrains is her kind of broad-shouldered rebuke of conflation of political ideology and faith. She really talks a lot about people who express something as a tenet of their faith when really what they're talking about is their political ideology, and they lose the kind of distinction between what their religion teaches and what their political party espouses. So the first clip that we're going to listen to is her answer to a question about climate denial, and she's talking about why sometimes some people of faith become climate deniers.
So where does this denial come from then? It comes from solution aversion. We don't want to fix it. Why? Not because of any religious or theological reasons, because of political reasons. We don't want to fix it. But if we say, sure, it's real, all the scientists agree, it's affecting the poorest and most marginalized people in the world, but I don't want to fix it, we don't feel very good about ourselves if we say that. So what we do is our defense mechanisms kick in and we engage in motivated reasoning. We go out and we look, and the internet is happy to help us find reasons why it can't possibly be true. Those godless liberal atheist scientists are just making it up to line their pockets with government grants. It's been warmer before, so why does it matter? What about those countries over there? Why should we be doing anything ourselves? It's too expensive. Oh, this is a good one. Those poor countries, who are we to tell them they can't use fossil fuels? They should be able to use them. I'm like, I have news for you people. The Paris Agreement is voluntary. Nobody's telling anybody what they can or can't use. It's your own country decides what you're bringing to the table. And most of those low-income countries don't have fossil fuel resources. So if you are trying to persuade them to use fossil fuel resources, it's so you can sell them your resources and make more money off the backs of people who are already suffering the impacts of our choices. When I travel, I often engage with Christian communities outside the US, and I'm Canadian myself. And when I hear these climate denial arguments, when I hear this window dressing that hides solution aversion, I stop and I ask people, where did you hear that? And 9 times out of 10, and I have a colleague, Jean-Francois Mouhot, who's a historian who's actually done analysis of this in France, 9 out of 10 times I hear, and Jean-Francois' work has shown this, they come directly from a US source. They come from a US book or video or blog or website or newsletter. Religiously sounding climate denial is uniquely American phenomena that, thanks to the internet, has now reached Canada, Australia, the UK, France, and beyond. Why is it that US Christians have fallen into this trap? Because today, 40% of people who self-identify as evangelical in the United States don't go to church. So if they don't go to church, where are they being catechized, so to speak? The churchy word for taught. Where are they being taught what they believe? They're not being taught from any religious text by any religious leader. They are being taught by the church of Facebook, by the church of their social media feed, by the church of whatever media outlet they listen to. That's who they're being taught by. And so today, in the United States, a huge number of people who self-identify as Christian, I'm just saying Christian because that's the dominant religion in the United States, the label people would pick, a huge number of people who self-identify as Christian, and it isn't just evangelicals, it is Catholics too, big time. Their statement of faith is written primarily by their political ideology. Christian is a political label. And when the two come in conflict, politics and the Bible, they will go with politics over the Bible. I was speaking with an elected representative 6-7 years ago now when the Pope was visiting. He was Catholic, Republican. Very excited about the Pope's visit. Talked all about, the events that were happening and how he'd get to meet the Pope and how his family would get to meet the Pope and how as a Catholic it was sort of the pinnacle of his, of his religious experience. And I said, well, so you must be really, you must be really interested in the Pope's encyclical then. Because the encyclical was just coming out. Without missing a beat, he said, oh no, the Pope's dead wrong on that. But have I told you about the dinner that we're going to get to go to? So that just shows you, it's all politics. So what do we need to do? I think, and Bee and I have been working in this field for a very long time, we need to hold up a mirror and remind people of who they are. And that's actually a biblical principle. The book of James talks about, you're like a person who looked at themselves in the mirror and went away and forgot who you are. Mm-hmm. Now, some people never were. Some people just use that label as a political, cultural label. But for people who actually believe this but have been led astray by the catechism, so to speak, of our news and media feeds, hold up the mirror and remind people who we are, because faith has a lot to bring to the table. What is climate change? What is the impacts? What is the suffering that we're seeing other than a failure to love? And when we love, as it says, love covers a multitude of sins. Love means I'm going to look to your needs above mine. I'm going to look to who is suffering, and I'm going to do everything I can to alleviate that suffering. I'm not going to, as Bob Bullard said in the plenary below, I'm not going to focus on the word that begins with G and ends with D and has an R-E-E in the middle. Greed.
There was certainly some real talk in that. I was taking notes, and I think you'll probably see some of it reflected in some upcoming Twitter posts on my feed. Definitely something for us, quote-unquote, church folks to be thinking about. Any reflections from you on that piece?
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't pull any punches, does she? And it's particularly interesting when you understand her husband's a pastor. She herself she's a church wife, in addition to being a globally recognized climate scientist. And it's not easy or glib for her to say the things she does, to point out the realities that she sees. It's been interesting watching her career develop and seeing how it started out that there were people, mainstream, liberal, progressive people in the faith community who thought, well, this is going to take care of everything. Now that we have this person who really understands, really has this completely authentic faith perspective and is a scientist, she's going to be able to get everybody's heads on straight about these issues. And to see how hard she works and how she's constantly innovating. She's constantly innovating in the way that she applies her message, and how resistant some parts of the political edifice are to even this very authentic, authoritative message. It's just been fascinating, and we're so lucky to have her. I will say along that line, that we are lucky to have her. Early on, when she was first in Texas, Texas Impact reached out to her and wanted to work with her all the time, and we did do stuff with her. But at one point she reached out to me and said, you keep asking me to be a spokesperson on faith and climate, but in Texas, there are so many people who are doing the same work that I am, who are just as authentically religious. They work at other universities. A lot of them work in small universities and colleges. They aren't people who get their name on the cover of the Rolling Stone. They don't achieve that same kind of international recognition, but they are doing really important science, and they ought to be elevated as well. And when she said that, it was kind of a whack on the side of the head, I think, for me to think we are always working to elevate local congregations and the work that local congregations are doing on the issues that we care about. But it hadn't really occurred to me to try to seek out people who are in those local congregations who are scientists. And that's been something that we've been continuing to kind of struggle with since then.
I think it is important for Texas Impact to lift up some of those voices, but I also think part of the project of this podcast and the community that we're building is that it's important for each and every one of our listeners to take the information that we get here and share it, right? This isn't just content for you to consume, but if the problem is people in the pews aren't thinking theologically about these policy issues, then it's all of our job to make sure that we're bringing voices to the pews, to people, right?
That's such a good point, Scott. And to that point, if listeners are themselves members of academic communities and they know that they have folks in their college or university that are members of their faith community that are doing that kind of work. I know I've run into folks, for example, at Texas A&M University. There are plenty of people who are doing climate science who are also members of faith communities, including faith communities that are members of Texas Impact. If you know those people or you are those people, let us know. We'd love to elevate your voice too. And I know that Katharine and the other globally recognized climate scientists would like us to elevate your voice as well.
Good. So there is the first homework assignment from this segment. I understand we have some more audio to listen to. What are we hearing next? Yeah,
and hopefully one more little chunk of audio yielding one more big homework assignment. I know how you love to give homework, Scott.
Yes.
So the other thing that I wanted to highlight was what Katharine had to say about stories. And, this was a journalism conference, so there's a lot of talk about stories. But when we talk about stories, sometimes we are talking about someone's personal story. When journalism is talking about stories, I think we think that they are talking about a news story or a feature story. Katharine has some really important things to say about stories as teaching tools and the way that stories reframe our understanding of the world. So I'd like us to just listen to that clip.
The amazing stories of what people are doing from a faith perspective, and again, every faith tradition has these stories, are not being told. Instead, if you go to Google News and you Google, Christian, you are going to get all these political stories about people using Christianity as window dressing and excuses to reject basic human caring about other people. So don't just buy the excuses, but support the counter narrative. Stories are essential. Stories literally synchronize our brain waves with each other, neuroscientists have found. Stories hit us right in the heart and help us see ourselves and other people's lived experience, and stories are what change our perspective. And as Mira and I were talking about before this session, everybody comes from different background, different tradition, but around the world, over 85% of people come from a faith tradition. And so a big part of ways to connect with people is to engage that in our stories. It is not the only thing. It is not necessarily even that I don't even want to rank things, but it is a big piece that we sometimes miss when we either sort of accept what's presented as religion or when we hesitate to ask.
What are the stories then that you think need to be told?
You know, we spend so much time, Scott, talking to people about how their story matters and how their story is the most important advocacy information they have. I think one of the things that people could take away from this segment is your story also should be part of the story. So if your congregation is doing work around the environment, around climate change, if your women's group is doing a mission project that involves people in another country that have been impacted by climate change, which many of our women's groups do, if your youth group is planting trees for Earth Day, that story needs to be part of the media story in your community. And the media, just like everybody else, can't be everywhere all at one time and all-knowing. They won't know if nobody tells them. So I think sometimes we do hide our lights under a bushel, don't we? We don't issue a press release about the fact that our congregation did solar on our rooftop, or that we replaced all our toilets, or we insulated our stained glass, or whatever the activity was. It's not wrong to do a press release, or to, better yet, call your local TV reporter and newspaper reporter and say, you don't know me, but I'm with whatever congregation I'm with, and we've done a thing that we think is important. It's important that it be part of the narrative about how people in our community are addressing climate and environmental concerns. The worst they can say is, we don't have time to talk to you right now, but the best they could say is, you're the story I was waiting for.
Any other homework you'd leave with our listeners today?
If you've been listening to this segment and you thought, well, I have a story I should tell Texas Impact, don't wait. Call. Listeners are standing by. We're standing by waiting to hear your story. We want to know what you're doing. You can email us, you can call us, and you can get to us on social media, like Scott keeps saying. He's there all the time.
All the time. And remember, if you appreciated the segments of this, make sure to check out our YouTube channel for even more. Bee, thanks so much for the time today. Appreciate you sharing part of your conversation with us.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Tell your boy Happy Earth Week.
I will. Happy Earth Week to you and yours. I want to thank our guests today, Luke Metzger and Josh Houston, and a special thanks to Bee Moorhead, Katharine Hayhoe, and Mira Subramanian for their lively exchange on faith and climate. But I especially want to thank you for tuning in. It is Earth Week, and I hope we all spend some time thinking about what steps we can take to address the climate crisis. It might be as simple as using less AC, but I hope we'll also consider what small steps we can take to advocate for systemic change, and then take that one step. And then bonus points if you invite a friend to join you. Your community and the world need Texans of faith engaged in this work. So I hope you'll share this important content in this episode with your friends and congregations. And with that, it's time to draw this episode to a close. If you've stayed with us this long, you must have enjoyed the content, so I hope you'll share it with your friends and congregations and leave us a rating or review. That way, even more of your friends can find us and join in the movement for justice in Texas. And there's a lot going on, so keep an eye on Texas Impact's social media for upcoming announcements, or email me at scott@texasimpact.org with questions. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members of Texas Impact by going to texasimpact.org. Friends, these are wild times, and 2022 is an important year for democracy, our communities, and our ecosystems as we work to create a healthy planet for future generations. The world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work. Weekly
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnett, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is Bee Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.